Can you see my screen okay?
I can, yes.
Great. Thank you everyone who's joined so far. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes for more people to log in. Thank you to everyone who's joining. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes for more people to log in. All right, we're just gonna give one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Linda Grant with the City of Milpitas. Super excited to hold this webinar today. So first, we're just going to go over some basics. I know we're all pretty familiar with Zoom, so I'll make this pretty quick. So as you can see, all attendees are muted by default. We will actually be doing questions at the end of the presentation. And there'll be two ways that you can ask your questions. You can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask Juanita directly, or you can type it into the Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the BOSCA website. A little background about BOSCA. BOSCA represents 26 agencies that include cities, water districts, a water company, and a university, all that purchase water from the San Francisco Regional Water System. BOSCA's goal is high quality supply of water at a fair price. Outdoor water use represents the single largest on-tap opportunity for water conservation in the BOSCA area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water-wise plants and efficient irrigating can really help us conserve water and get through this drought. For Milpitas residents, we actually work with Valley Water to provide rebate programs. So you can get $4 per square foot, which is up to $5,000 for converting your high water use grass into drought tolerant plants, which you'll learn a lot of great steps on how to do that today. We also offer irrigation equipment upgrades, rainwater capture for rain barrels and rain gardens, and more. So please go to savewatermilpitas.org, learn more all about these great rebate programs that are available for you. We also just recently launched the Water Smart online portal where you'll be able to log in and view your near real-time water use. So once again, go to savewatermilpitas.org to learn about all these great resources. If you are from a different BOSCA agency, BOSCA offers a similar lawn conversion rebate, the Lawn Be Gone rebate of $1 to $4 per square foot and up to $200 for rain barrels. BOSCA also has a smart controller program with Ratio and an optional rain garden rebate. For more information and to figure out what your agency participates in, go to bayareaconservation.org. We also want to thank Valley Water for helping provide this class today. They have some resources as well as some videos on Valley Water's website. Okay, great. Thank you for joining this class and please come to future classes. It looks like we have one more planned for this summer on lawn conversion, and stay tuned for additional classes in the fall. Go to bayareagardening.org to get even more resources. Great. Well, now I'm going to let our instructor, Juanita Salisbury, take over. She is a great expert on all these topics, and we're super excited to have her.
Thank you, Linda. I will go ahead and share my screen. And we will start the slideshow from the beginning. Well, thanks everybody for coming to class tonight. I'm going to be talking about drought hacks, tips for converting your lawn to a water efficient landscape. I am Juanita Salisbury. I have a PhD in biopsychology and a degree in landscape architecture. And you can follow what I do here in Palo Alto on Facebook and Instagram, the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. I also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. And here in Palo Alto, I designed, install, and maintain 5 public pollinator gardens, which feature California native plants. So you can go anytime, the gardens are always open, to see what these native plants look like growing in the wild, or the wilds of Palo Alto. you know, to see how they look, how big they get, how tall they are, when they bloom, that sort of thing. And there are 5 gardens: the Island Drive Garden, Arcadia Place, Hopkins Avenue Garden, Gwynda Street, and Primrose Way. And this is on Embarcadero Road. And we are working on linking these 2 gardens via the planting strip between the road and the sidewalk, and making the Embarcadero Road Pollinator Corridor project, which is now underway. So tonight, though, what are we going to talk about? So in broad terms and broad concepts, I like to do broad concepts because not everything that's really specific is going to be applicable to your particular situation. That's why if you have a kind of all-encompassing concept, then you can see how that applies more readily than something very small and specific. But basically, the guiding principle here is form follows function. As a designer, I'm all about function, because it's always good to have a reason for putting certain things into your garden. We're going to talk about getting rid of your lawn, what the alternatives to lawn are, and then we're going to talk about trees and native plants and maintenance. And embedded in all of these topics is those drought hacks. So what we're going to be doing is using California native planting, function-based design, and biology as drought hacks to really optimize every last drop of water in our gardens. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about form following function. Whenever you're deciding what to do, you, as a designer, you know, always look at the function, you know, and what does the lawn function for? What is it? What do you use it for? Do you use it to walk on? Do you sit on it? Do you play on it? Do you just like a big swath of green? You know, consider the function. This is one of the main tips to start to optimize every drop of water. So consider function. I'm going to be very particular about function here. Do you need a lawn? Okay, what are you using it for? So we're going to leverage those decisions, our function-based decision-making, then on optimizing our water use. And we know that outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. Lawns can use up to 50% of outdoor water. So consider the function when deciding on whether or not to have a lawn. What are you using it for? We know that in addition to using a lot of water, if you mow it intensively, you can increase weeds and lawn pests. So, you know, a lawn, what is it good for? So in this particular picture, note where people are congregating at this party. They're all on the patio, and there's one child running on the grass. Something to think about. Now, don't be afraid of these 2 charts here, but these are illustrative of showing just that irrigation does account for most of a home's water use. The top graph here shows the total outdoor or indoor water use for a new 3-bedroom home. And this was published by the Codes and Standards Research Report, the California's Residential Indoor Water Use Report, 2nd edition in 2015. So for a regular 3-bedroom home, they're figuring about 46,521 gallons for indoor use. Your results may vary depending on the size of your home and the number of people using it, how many showers they take per day, that kind of thing. So one of the things that I do as a landscape architect is I design irrigation systems. And in some municipalities, when you're installing an irrigation system, you have to have the total water budget figured out. So for each valve that you have in your irrigation system, you have to know how much water is coming out of that for the entire year for each valve. So I did a calculation for a client, and don't get scared about this. Basically, there were 9 valves, and the 2 valves that went to lawn areas had the most water use. So for the outdoor water use for this client, they had about 63,320 gallons of water per year for outside. And, while an average home uses less than that, their lawn, though, used 28,539 gallons, or 45% of the irrigation water. And it was only 19% of the landscape area. So a big drain, as it were, on water uses. So, for a total water use then of about 109,841 gallons a year for the year, the outside irrigation with getting about 58% of the total water use for this particular site. That's a lot. So how can we bring that down? I think, first of all, it's really good to be mindful of it, that a lot is going to these irrigation valves. So let's just get rid of the lawn. And so there are some great resources. If you wanted to just get rid of your lawn, you can sheet mulch. And this is a great resource, the lawntogarden.org/residents. And I'm not going to go into the real nitty-gritty of sheet mulching, but basically you can go to this particular website and they will walk you through the various steps and why each step, why you do certain things certain ways, so it's all thought out very nicely. And there's also stopwaste.org to go into even more detail about how to remove your lawn. Some people say, well, maybe I can just remove the sod. There's really no use in removing sod because you're getting rid of organic material. If some people spritz on grass killing chemicals, there's really no reason to do that. The easy way to do it, again, is to sheet mulch. Put cardboard right on top of that lawn. The lawn decomposes underneath. You pile up mulch and compost on top of the cardboard, and instantly your lawn is gone. And so when you do that, then you have some alternatives. Okay, so lawn is gone. What are the alternatives to really maximizing every single drop of water? Mulch looks good. There's nothing like some fresh mulch going down. So that's an alternative to a lawn. You can just spread some mulch. If you want a surface that you can walk on, and you don't really care about planting, it's easy and it's cheap, and it will last for a year or two, and then you refresh the mulch. If you want to plant through the mulch and into that soil, you can do it right after you sheet mulch. Basically push the mulch back, slit open the cardboard and create a planting hole, and you can pop a plant right in. So and kind of an easy way to create a clean slate and decide how to do it. Now you're thinking, some people are thinking, but I really want some grasses. So how are grasses a drought hack? Well, let's talk about California native grasses. There's a company that I use to get sod from that is Delta Bluegrass. They are in the Delta area, just around Sacramento, or on the way to Sacramento. And they make up these sod blends that have native grasses in them. Native grasses use about 1/3 as much water as a regular non-native lawn. And the beauty of these grasses is that they have deep root systems. So they are going to be quite resilient, and those roots are going to go until they find water underground. There are a couple of different kinds that they provide here. You can go to their website and take a look for a couple of different looks. I mean, how pretty is that? Nice soft green. One that I use in my own tiny meadow that I have is the Agrostis palens, because it can take some shade. It has a very fine texture, dark green, really a beautiful grass. And I didn't use sod, I just used seeds, and I just chucked the seeds out into the regular lawn, that kind of letting die, and did that during the rainy season. So that's one way to sort of convert things over. If you don't want to sheet mulch and start with a new sod, you can slowly remove the old sod, and by pulling out clumps of grass, creating bare spots, and then reseeding with one of these seed types. They look nice. Here's a friend's house who has a beautiful native garden, and in here she's got some carex, which is a nice grass, and it, you know, people use it on the little strips between the street and the sidewalk. You know, it looks great. One non-native that I have used in the past is a thyme, which is elfin. It stays nice and flat and uses relatively little water. So you can get some nice green looks there that you can walk on, you know, if you want to have a walkable surface. Now, if you don't want a walkable surface and you love that just swath of green that just is very uniform and looks great, I'm going to give you some specific examples, and you can, you know, go out and use these because they're tried and true. And one of them here is this native ground cover, Ceanothus thriciflorus Yankee Point, and it's a beautiful evergreen plant. Evergreen meaning it does not lose its leaves all at once. Stays green all year round, about 15 inches tall, blue blossoms, can take sun, some shade, and it's very low water use. So maybe about 1/10 as much as a lawn would use. So if you really want to squeeze some use out of those droplets that we're irrigating with, Ceanothus is a great option. Grows fast too. Another walkable plant, the Ceanothus, of course, is not walkable, but another walkable plant is Achillea millefolium. This is semi-evergreen. It spreads by runners. You can mow it. I don't mow mine. You do get blooms on this, and it can grow in sun and shade. So this is a nice plant, very fine texture. You can use other plants if you like strawberries. Let me just tell you these Fragaria vesca. The fruit may be small, but they taste like candy. They're wonderful. And they prefer to be in some shade, but they can take some sun. Another native ground cover, this is a salvia or a sage that we have over at the Primrose Way Garden. And it's evergreen, it's very fragrant. It only grows about 12 inches tall, maybe a little taller in the center, and it grows really fast, these things. 8 feet across in 2 years. At the Primrose Way Garden, one of them is about 12 feet across, and it's still going. It's actually reached the street, and it's going into the street, so we have to cut it back. But again, gives you that nice swath of green. That looks pretty good. Okay, so those are some specific examples that look great, use very little water, and are really low maintenance. Just throw that in there as a bonus. You're saying, okay, so I'm going to get rid of my lawn. I don't really need something to walk on. I want to plant a native garden. You know, I want something that's going to look lush and be colorful. That's going to be low maintenance. You know, what can I plant that is, you know, not going to use much water, because I, you know, don't want to really spend a lot of time like watering things, maintaining things. So my go-to resource to find plants, and we're going to be talking specifically California native plants here. My resource here is the calscape.org website. It's an easy to use searchable database that has lots of information, lots of resources. You can find California native plants and research those plants. And then from those plants, you create a palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. This website is done by the California Native Plant Society, and it is just chock full of great information. This is a screenshot that I took of their landing page. It tells you a little bit about Calscape, how to contact them, a planting guide, which goes into a lot of detail about best practices, nurseries where you can find plants. There are native plant nurseries that specialize in plants. You can create an Excel spreadsheet, and then butterflies. What's that about? But you can see we have a lot to choose from. 7,990 plants native to California, and they've broken it down handily into all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, etc. And you can actually search by location. It's really important to plant what is generally local to your area. Okay, those plants will do better because they're locally adapted. So you can search by your location. But, and here's where we get into biology being one of those drought hacks. A better question then is who to feed. Now, I'm all about biology because biology is one of those tools in our toolbox for optimizing water use that we don't really emphasize enough, because life is all about circulating water in the planet. And when you plant things, you're circulating water through those plants and into organisms. We know that there are that plant species need insects to survive, pollinators specifically like bees. And we know that speciation occurs more rapidly with pollinators. Speciation refers to those genetic variations that we see in colors and in form that create new species. And that happens faster when you have bees, pollinators, moving genes around for you in the form of pollen. And so the pollinators are spreading those plant species then that butterfly and moth larvae eat. So whenever you're choosing a plant, you can go into the CalScape and then finding what's local to your area and then rank those based on the number of species that use that plant on which to feed. So my take-home message in this part is that biological factors may be more important consideration than abiotic factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. Okay, we're leveraging the power of biology, which is powerful. It's very powerful. And here in California, we have 1,368 butterflies and moth species. And it talks about various host plants that they feed on. And in Santa Clara County, we have 87 species of butterflies and moths. And yes, I did take this photograph. Many of these photographs I take myself. I do monitor my pollinator gardens to see that we're actually helping insects in these gardens. I have lots and lots of pictures. You're going, okay, so all right, so we're going to be planting native and we're going to be really reducing the amount of water that we're using, but how much water are these plants using? How can I find out how much water the plants are actually using? And this is a very handy website. It's the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. It's an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species, and it's published by the University of California Cooperative Extension and the California Department of Water Resources. So plants are ranked based on the percent of water use of turf grass, which is the reference against which their water use is measured. So turf grass is 100%. And then whatever percentage of that a plant uses, that is their plant factor. So a very low water use species here has a plant factor of 0 to 10%. Low, 20 to 30%, and so forth. So we can find out, you know, we can plant all very low water use plants and really squeeze out all the use out of a single drop of water. So this is a very handy resource whenever you're deciding what to plant. You know, use all your data. That is one of the big drought tips, is use more information to make really informed choices. Now, once you have things sort of figured out what you want to plant, I always like to give people a quick landscape architecture class here in this particular slide. This is the basics of plant layout. And for the do-it-yourselfer, I always say use graph paper to lay out things. It's just easier. You can use a square on your graph paper to equal 1 foot. So if you have graph paper with 1/4 inch squares, your scale can be 1/4 inch equals a foot. So you can draw things to scale. So the first thing you do before you lay out any plants, okay, just wait on the plants. First, think your function. Are you going to create a patio? Are you going to create a pathway? Put those things in first, okay? Those give you planting areas in those leftover spots. So that's about 4 years of landscape architecture in about 30 seconds. So, you know, put in your pathways, put in your hardscape, whatever. Then you add your plants from your plant palettes as circles at their mature diameter. Most circles should just touch, but can overlap for spacing. You want to plant in masses and accent then with larger trees and shrubs. Plant in odd numbers for massing. Place large trees first, then shrubs, then layer in perennials, vines, bulbs, succulents, and annuals. And don't forget to plan for plants underneath tall trees and shrubs. Okay. By the way, this talk will be available as a PDF. So if you're scrambling to take notes, you can refer back at your leisure to the PDF version. But you're going, oh, Juanita, why California native plants? A number of reasons, which I'll get to, but one of the main reasons is that California is a biodiversity hotspot. It's a very special place on the planet. There are only maybe 30, 35 biodiversity hotspots on the entire planet, and we are one of them. Many of our species, almost 8,000 species of plants, are found nowhere else on the planet. We have more plants than any other state in the United States. Many of our species are drought tolerant, and we have a lot of native pollinators here. About 1,600 species of native bees, more than any other state in the United States. And we have 4,000 bee species across the US. Honeybees are not native, we're not going to talk about them. But the reason why I bring up bees is, and native plants, is people say, well, why do we have so many plants? Well, we have so many plant species largely because we have so many unique ecosystems in California, and we have a lot of very unique pollinators. So those two things are working to create a lot of different species. Now, let's talk about plants. Remember, we're leveraging biology here to really just use the goodness of all of every drop of water. And when you're using these plants, you have to really consider their function, all right? You know, so plants are food. Plants are the beginning of everything in the environment. So we have to really look at their function to understand how they're going to be used when we're using function-based decision-making. So energy from the sun is converted then by plants into energy that caterpillars and other insects eat. And look at this big, fat, juicy caterpillar. This caterpillar is essentially a bag of protein and water. So we're storing some water from the plant in this insect, and that is getting fed, passed up the food chain to other organisms. Okay, so what we know about California native plants and native plants in general is that native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. Bugs, insects are very picky about what they eat. They have very specific taste. They only like certain chemicals. And so if you're not planting native plants, you're not really transferring energy efficiently, optimally up into the food chain so that that water that those plants are using can then be moved throughout the ecosystem. If you think of water like money, for example, you know, maybe the best use for money isn't in a bank account. Maybe it's in the community where it's keeping the engine of economy going. Water is very much the same way. We want it to be within organisms so that we can keep the ecosystems working like a nice machine. Okay, so functionally, plants aren't really decorations. They're actually food. And I mean, plants are decorative. They're pretty, they smell nice, they're glossy, they just, you know, they're colorful, they're great. But I mean, realistically, plants are food. So if we look at this picture over here, here's another little bag of moisture and protein. Your plants are going to get eaten. This is what you want. In fact, this is what I always look for when I'm buying plants is something chewing on it, because I know that it's going to be appropriate in my garden. And as such, we know that when we plant these plants, your garden will attract many native pollinators, and in turn other insects, and in turn birds. Okay. As I said, when we're leveraging that immense power of biology, we're actually optimizing the way that water is used in the environment. And so native plants are the critical parts to sustaining life, and also really combating the drought. Why is it important to see native plants as food? Because your native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects. You know, it's best to avoid making the garden an ecological trap. An ecological trap is something in the environment that attracts organisms, and because of this attraction, makes it easier for them to be killed through predation or other means. So we want organisms to be able to complete their life cycles, and that way circulate that moisture through the environment. And this particular slide I made to show that when we use native plants, we enhance the connectivity and complexity in the environment, which makes the environment more resilient. Okay, it's better able to withstand drought. So the more complexity and the more connectivity, the more plants support each other, leading to reduced irrigation needs. Remember, we're really leveraging that biology because that's one of the most powerful tools that we have. So less water doesn't mean less plants necessarily. As you add more plants, you're building a community of plants and other organisms that support each other and share water, nutrients, and information. So imagine a machine where you're adding all the right parts, okay? Certain plants are engines within this machine to keep things moving. And at some point, it becomes self-assembling. A goal that you want to do is to try to have 20 different native plant species local to your area to start with. And in this picture over here is some drought hacks that I've used in the past. Leaving piles of leaves trap moisture in the ground. Rain gardens or swales help to infiltrate moisture into the ground. More leaves underneath trees will be shading and cooling the soil and keeping it moist for tree roots. And then decorative rocks have another function. They trap moisture. Oftentimes you'll see plants growing right at the edge of rocks because underneath that rock it's going to be moist, because that's a good sun shield. Okay, the moisture is not evaporating away. Plants then reach down with tap roots like native grasses and big trees like this, and then they have lateral surface roots that spread those nutrients and moisture out to other plants. So lots of connectivity, lots of little hacks that we can sort of enhance those things that the plants are already doing. Leave your leaves. Leaves are ecosystem gold because you get a lot of pupa that hang out in leaves, little pockets of moisture again, and swales, rocks, anything that's trapping moisture in the soil. Now, what do we mean by plant communities? And this is from the Vegetation Glossary on the California Native Plant Society website. A group of plant species living together and linked together by their effects on one another and the responses to the environment they share. Typically, the plant species that co-occur in a plant community show a definite association or affinity with each other, which means these plants are basically play well together. They like each other. They've evolved together over millennia. Okay, so they're going to be sharing resources. They're not going to be fighting with each other. We don't think about plants as being social creatures, but plants do exist in communities, which are social structures. And so California, biodiversity hotspot, right? We have many plant communities: coastal scrub, oak chaparral, desert, redwood forest, and so forth. And those plant communities are largely a function of the pollinators that live in them. Think of bees as farmers whose function in the environment is to spread that genetic diversity of the plants for other insects to eat. And those bees mostly are moving that genetic material around. So for your particular plant community, the majority of the plants in your garden should be local species. Aim for over 70% being local and appropriate to your plant community. And here's a great hike. If you ever get up to the northern tip of the Point Reyes seashore, out to the very northern tip, you can walk through a wonderful environment filled with beautiful cobweb thistle and lupins and poppies and coyote bush. It's really special. Like my little animation there. So just reiterating that bees, and here's a beautiful yellow-faced bumblebee with pollen on her hind leg, which is genetic material. This is what they do. This is their function, is to spread around genes. So now that we have the biology part mostly down here, let's think about the sequence of plant selection and some tips here. Start with trees and large plants first, then shrubs, then perennials. You want to fit in as many trees as possible. Then the shrub layer should compose over 60% of all plants. Focus on those evergreen shrubs, and I'll say why in a minute. And then over time, add in as many grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, etc. as you can. You want to aim for a mix of the herbaceous ones and woody perennials. Herbaceous ones actually die back during the winter. Some completely disappear, but they come back. The best time to plant is late fall and winter for the best results. In the California native plant community, it's known as the planting season. It becomes a race to get all your plants in, starting at some people start middle of October, and planting season's almost over. You could probably squeeze in a couple of things, but it's really getting too warm to plant and have great results. Use what I like to do, because I planted so many hundreds of plants, is I like planting smaller plants, 4-inch pots or 1 gallon, or even seeds. Because if you have a plant with a taproot, a seed is just so much better. It's not curling up at the bottom of a pot. It's actually shooting straight down looking for water. So seeds are great, they're cheap, and it's an easy way to get things in without digging a hole or a big hole. And then to protect those young plants from squirrels, rabbits, and other critters who want to undo your work, I like to use chicken wire cages over the top of things to protect them. Again, let's start with trees. I'm going to harp on trees for a while here. Why? You want to start with your keystone plant genera, and keystone plants form the backbone of habitat resources: food, shelter, nesting sites. Now you're going, what does this have to do with irrigation again? Well, remember, these organisms contain moisture, so we want our plants to be as efficient with their moisture as possible. So low water use plants, but then remember, they're spreading their moisture in the environment. And those keystone plants then are helping other plant species and other organisms to survive. So really getting like as much use out of one drop of water as possible. Those keystone plants are going to be providing food for dozens or hundreds of types of caterpillar species upon which so many other animals depend. And our big insight here is when you support large numbers of other organisms, the keystone species provide those connections in the environment. Remember where I talked about connections and connectivity? Imagine a plant species that feeds 100 different organisms. That's 100 different links to other things in the environment where moisture can go. So takeaway technique: include at least a few keystone plants to provide a resilient native plant garden. Those keystone species, remember, if we're ranking them by number of butterflies and moths, the more that a plant species feeds, the more of a keystone it is. Okay. And here in Santa Clara County, oops, sorry, we have 13 tree species native to the county that we can plant. And trees help save water. You know, they cool the air by releasing water into the air, which cools and cleans it. They form half of the rain cycle. They improve water quality by filtering rainwater. They slow down impacts of heavy rain. They reduce flooding and help stabilize soil. So, and they provide shade, which is critical for making the temperatures cooler. So if it's cooler, water is not going to evaporate as much. So big drought hack here is planting some trees. People say, not really sure where to start. You know, create a patch in the lawn, make an area for a tree. Start there. You know, it doesn't have to be complicated. We know that clouds form more often over forested areas than non-forested areas, again, because trees are exhaling moisture. And the cooling effect of clouds and the carbon dioxide captured by trees more than offset the reflection of the sun during time when the deciduous trees are bare. So huge drought hack, plant trees, especially those low water use ones. And so what trees to plant? Well, my go-to plant for really are as the engine, or one of the engines, one of those keystone species, is the valley oak. No other trees come close to delivering all the ecosystem services that oaks provide. Now, the valley oak used to be 61% of the tree cover in Santa Clara Valley. Now it's 1%, which is a shame because they're beautiful trees. They're a keystone species. They're deciduous, which means they drop all their leaves each year. And those need to be left under the tree because there's so many insects that form larvae and then pupa, and then they hang out in the leaf litter. And the leaf litter is good for the tree. So super low maintenance tree, just leave the leaf litter there. The tap roots seek out the water table, and then the lateral surface roots will share that water with other plants. You want to plant underneath with native plants like Monardella species, which is coyote mint. Non-native plants under oaks can be detrimental to the tree's health. And valley oaks are insect factories, okay, a big engine in the ecosystem. Just wonderful things. They actually grow really fast and they can live up to 600 years and they add value to real estate. So excellent plant to plant. And this is the Hopkins Avenue pollinator garden with this big, beautiful valley oak here. Now, I always tell people if you don't want to be messing with leaves, use evergreen trees and shrubs. Those that don't drop their leaves all at once, you have less leaf litter to deal with. They look nice and green all year long, and you occasionally prune them if branches are not where they're supposed to be. So an evergreen tree and shrub is just so much easier sometimes because they almost always look good. And you're going, what trees can I fit in my yard, Juanita? I can't fit a big, coast live oak or a valley oak because those things get huge. Yes, they do. But in my tiny yard, these are the trees that I have. And I think this is all of them. I keep thinking I might have missed one. So some of my favorites is, that I love, Acer macrophyllum, the big leaf maple. This has gigantic leaves. When this tree gets full size, it will provide a kingdom of shade. It is deciduous, but those leaves are pretty good eating for some of the insects. We have mountain mahogany, fast growing, wonderful tree. An actual willow, what? Yes, a willow that I hand water because I do like their roots to be wet. So I hand water it, once or twice a week. Elderberry for the berries, very tasty. One of my absolute favorite evergreens is the Prunus salicifolia, the holly leaf cherry, super low water use. And look how glossy and green those leaves are. Beautiful plant. Acer negundo, my existing street tree, I didn't plant that one. Corlus cornuta, hazelnuts. If you like filberts and hazelnuts, plant a couple of these and you will eventually get some nuts. Prunus virginiana, which is deciduous, Arctostaphylos glauca, big berry manzanita, red bud, and you can see I've got it underneath a cage because it's dinky. This is one of those 4-inch pots that I planted because I didn't want to dig a big hole for a tree. And then the native toyon, which is an excellent shrub. The one that I planted in our yard, I watered it when I planted it, and then I didn't ever water it again. And it's green and lush all year long. It has white blooms right now. We'll have red berries eventually. So, you know, there's a lot you can plant in your yards. I myself want all the plants. So that's why I have 5 pollinator gardens. Okay, so now moving on from trees, we're going to talk about shrubs. In Santa Clara County, there are 29 species to start with. Again, choose evergreen shrubs that don't go dormant to keep your yard looking nice and green. Search those plants and then rank by number of butterflies and moths that are hosted. If you have to make a choice, you like 2, but you're not sure which one, both are appropriate. Which one do you want? Which one hosts more larvae? That's the one you want. Because remember, larva, moisture. This is how we optimize every last drop. We're really optimizing the function of moisture in the environment with these plants. If you don't see something that you like, maybe expand your search area a little bit. I'm not too, some people get really like, oh, you have to really plant just anything that's super local. Well, you can start with local, but then you can add in some other things and relax a little bit. Here in my own yard, like I said, I want all the plants, but one of my favorite plants, and I grew this one from a seed, is the coffee berry. Look at those big, glossy green leaves. Very pretty. I love this plant. I can't wait for it to make more berries so I can have more of them. Vaccinium ovatum, the native huckleberry, and these make these little tiny blueberries that are delicious. Arctostaphylos, a manzanita, a ground cover, super easy to grow. Ribes viburnifolium, again, evergreen, super easy plant. I hardly do anything to this one. I prune it back because it is so vigorous, but literally it's like super easy. So for evergreen plants, if you want to keep things looking green and lush in your garden, have about 75% with evergreen, and that way it'll look nice and green and lush and full of moisture, even though it's being very conservative on moisture. But let's talk about another way to store moisture. What about succulents? So the word succulent comes from the Latin word succus or succus, meaning juice or sap. A simple and broad definition of plants that store water in their tissues. Remember, these are living organisms. We all store water in our tissues as living organisms, making them resistant to drought. Okay, succulents are super low maintenance. If you don't want to deal with a lot of things, succulents are great. Lots of different kinds: cactus, Sluicea, agaves, sedums, crassula, leptocyanes, dudleas, bulbs. What are that? So we have native bulbs, which, kind of like onions and things like that, store water in their tissues. Lots of different kinds to choose from. 188 succulent species to choose from in California. Go nuts. One of my favorites are the dudleas. And they're just like some of the most easy to grow plants. And people say you need to grow them at an angle to help them shed water to avoid rotting. Yes. Some of these seem to defy gravity, and you can find these actually growing on vertical surfaces. So, dudleas, they're just a great plant. Easy to grow from seed as well. Just a little bit more about dudleas. Some go dormant a little bit during the summertime once they've flowered and done their thing. No summer water is needed, but you can spritz them off every month or so if you feel so inclined. You just don't want to overwater them because they can rot. Oh, over water? No, not here in California. So one of my favorites is the Dahlia virens hassii, and this is March versus September, so still looks pretty good. The Dahlia bretonii gremlin looks great in March. Towards the end of the summer, as you can see, adapted to drought. Okay, it starts to dry up at the base, but it's still alive. Once it gets moisture, it just fluffs out and does its thing again. And you can create a lush look here by using sedums, okay, these don't go dormant. Look how pretty those are with the kind of light pale green, gray-green color. And you can mix it with a darker color for contrast with an Arctostaphylos. Look how pretty that is. That does not look like a big old droughty garden, but these plants, the sedums here, are juicy. This is a great way to store moisture in the garden. So lots of broad concepts here. Remember, we're wielding living things here, and so we're using them to help squeeze all the use out of a single drop of water that we possibly can. And we have to maintain them, but the beauty of native plant gardens is that they're less maintenance than a lawn. You don't have the mow and blow guys come once a week, so that saves money. And really all you need to do is basically keep weeds at bay, and weeds can be non-native. They can be natives that go a little berserk and spread everywhere. You want to irrigate plants to establish about once a week, and your irrigation should encourage those roots to seek water. So just outside the root ball, not right on top of the root ball or on top of the plant. Prune sparingly to control dried up dead material for fire safety. You don't have to fertilize or really amend your soil unless it's like super heavy clay. You may want to mix in some cactus mix. Mulch to control weeds initially and to help establish plants, and then just leave your leaves. If you don't like how messy that might look, you can then put a skim coat of bark chips on, 1 chip thick. You don't need leaf blowers in those planted areas. If you do use a leaf blower to clean off the hardscape, use an electrically powered one because that reduces fumes and emissions. And don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. So really don't hardly have to do anything. But you do want to avoid creating the ecological trap that I mentioned before. And this is okay, we're trying to, use our water as efficiently as possible, so that water within these organisms is going to be best used if they can complete their life cycle. So if you're preventing organisms from completing their life cycles, that's not an efficient use of moisture. So in a native plant garden, with its abundant blooms, with nectar and pollen for bees and host plants for butterflies and moth larvae, it will be very attractive to these insects. Remember, we don't want to lure everybody to dinner just to kill them before dessert or before they complete their life cycle. So some of the things that we can do so that we can, keep the moisture flowing through organisms is to use blackout curtains at night to keep moths from being eaten as they flutter against the window or till they exhaust themselves and die. Okay. We can connect our habitats together to reduce isolation. Again, reducing light pollution at night using those blackout curtains and using motion sensors on outdoor lighting instead of leaving lights on, or using yellow light bulbs outside, which are less attractive to insects. Leave those leaves. Leaves soak up moisture like a sponge, and everything from salamanders to pupa are in there, and all kinds of other organisms that are storing moisture in their bodies. So you want to have a place for them to hide out. And we want to eliminate our use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. 70% of native bee species nest in the ground, where they may be negatively affected by those chemicals if they get into the soil. And then reduce gasoline exhaust as much as possible by using electric vehicles and other electrical devices, because pollinators are using smell and vision to find food, and fumes from those machines interferes with that behavior. So other things that we can do to enhance the function of water is also enhancing the function of life and sort of making it possible for organisms then to complete their life cycles. So my final thoughts on everything here, among the other ecosystem services and saving money on water and maintenance, the more that you understand about these interrelationships in nature, you learn how to optimize the productivity of your native plant garden, leading to an abundance of life, as well as the enhancement of your appreciation and your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. These are the best practices for really fighting the drought and being as efficient as possible to squeeze out all the function out of a single drop of water. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Great, thank you so much, Juanita. I do see one question from Cecilia. She says that if there's any native plants that you would recommend to attract and create habitat for the California native ladybug.
So ladybugs like to eat aphids as larvae. You've probably seen them crawling around on plants like milkweed. Milkweed is really attractive for aphids. And I always think of aphids as the soft-shelled crab of the insect world. And so plants that are very attractive to aphids, like milkweed and lupin, will be very attractive to ladybugs, because you plant some of those plants in the aphids land, that's the dinner bell ringing for those larvae. Another plant that aphids like is the native thistles that we have, which native thistles are like super important in the environment, not just for nectar and pollen, but like they provide larval food for the painted lady butterfly, the Melita crescent butterfly, and the thistle seeds are actually eaten by finches. So the whole plant is getting used. But yeah, so consider the food chain for promoting the native ladybugs. They will show up. I mean, it's a guarantee. Once you plant native plants, you will have these insects show up, because it is food, and food's the great equalizer. Everybody will show up.
Great. We have a question on irrigation. Rashmi is asking, what kind of irrigation should I set up? Should I set up the irrigation system first and then plant the garden? And also, how do you decide between drip or soaker depending on the plants?
So when you're planning your garden, that's a great time to plan your irrigation system simultaneously. So you want to design your garden and then design your irrigation system to deliver water to the plants based on water use. So you'll have all of your very low water use plants on very specific valves to those areas, because you don't want high and low water use plants mixed together. You want those to be separate. Most places do promote drip irrigation. I find drip irrigation to be a little bit problematic, simply because in my experience, squirrels find the drip heads and chew them through. So you really have to monitor the drip irrigation quite a bit. That being said, depending on how large your property is, I have a small property, so I do a lot of hand watering, because I like to see how the plants are doing and, monitor what's happening in the environment. And hand watering actually is one of the lowest water irrigation methods that you have. Probably drip. Now there are some emitters that you can get where you can swap out, like if you have like an emitter with like 6 or 7 like spaghetti heads, I guess, that you can put a drip tube on, and then you have like different kinds of bubbler heads that you can put on, where you can deliver water specifically right to each plant. you know, my personal choice is that I don't like to put things on a schedule and then just, have it water automatically, because that kind of removes me from seeing if things are broken, because I just assume that the irrigation is turning on when it's supposed to. Um, so I would have a conversation with your landscape contractor slash designer, whoever it is that you have uh, designing your garden, because you don't want to just like kind of go willy-nilly. You want to really kind of plan things out. Always have a plan before you start, because then um, you know where you're going to need to expand your system if you have it, whether you can convert an existing system to irrigation. So these are all conversations to have with your landscape designer.
He has a follow-up question that he has 6,500 square feet. And what do you do when you go away for a long time?
So I enlist house sitters that will water things for me. And I know that's not what everybody does. Gosh, I go away for a long time. So, if I'm going to be gone for a week, what I will do before I leave is to give the things that need a deep soaking, a soaking before I go. And then, those plants will just have to tough it out, until I get back. And so, I mean, that's what I do. I mean, if you go away for a long time, you can obviously use an automated system if you have one. If you don't, like I do, then, you can have your gardeners water things. You just have to show them where things are. If you're hand watering, somebody has to go and check. So I hope that's helpful.
Great. And then we have a question from Christine. Where can you purchase the native bent grass to replace your lawn?
So you can get grass from the company that I mentioned as a sod, Delta Bluegrass. They have a great operation out in the Delta. Sod is an instant way to get a green lawn. I prefer to get seed myself, and kind of just seed in areas, because those grasses will eventually take over and move the non-native grasses out. And you can find those seeds online. I get my grass seed from Larner Seeds. You can get like a big bag of it, and I just throw it out during the rainy season, hope the birds don't eat all of it. So there are a couple of different methods. Seed, which you can get online, or you can maybe try Delta Bluegrass for native sod blends.
Great. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask Juanita directly, or you can enter them into the chat. We're around for a little longer, so we'll just give it a couple more minutes. Right now, I don't see any questions, but please, she's here. Ask any questions you have. All right. Rashmi has a follow-up. Was that Warner Seeds that you mentioned?
Oh, Larner. It's Larner, Larner Seed. And they have a lot of native seeds that you can purchase. Many of our gardens feature those native seeds. I also wanted to mention that Palo Alto is doing an open house on June 18th, and I will be there, and we will be giving away seeds that we've harvested from our gardens. So, it's all the really great plants that we love, and we want to share those. So, and that's going to be at the Municipal Services Center on East Bayshore Road in Palo Alto. So, there's seeds to be had, but grass seed, and other seeds, if you go to those native plant nursery resources at the CalScape online, you can look to see what they have available at each nursery.
Great. Any other questions? I guess I can ask one. Now that we're in the warmer weather, is there anything you suggest for kind of keeping plants alive through these really heat storms that we're having?
So, yes, you know, I find that shade can be a real lifesaver for a plant, and humans as well. And so some of the plants that I have, I showed you guys the picture of the Acer macrophyllum, the big leaf maple. Now that tree likes to be in a shadier location, so I actually have a patio umbrella next to it to shade it while it's establishing. Um, and just about 10 feet away from it, a big oak is growing, so that tree will eventually shade it. So in the meanwhile, during the hot months like it is now, I will put my patio umbrella up to give it some shade. I've used a variety of different things to shade plants, everything from shade cloth to yucky broken umbrellas that I've sort of weighted in place to shade plants. And that's just an easy way to do it. Do not succumb to the temptation to water things during the heat of the day, because the soil is going to be warm and moist, which is an invitation for diseases to get in and do bad things. So really, if you look on your weather app to see, what the weather is coming up, the weather forecast, if it's going to be hot, you want to give things a deep soaking beforehand, in the cool of the evening or the very cool of early morning. And then what you can do to keep the soil from getting too warm, and then pull some mulch up over the soil after you've watered it. Get some big flat stones to place around the base, and then shade those plants. I've done all of those things to just help things through some of the really hot, kind of miserable sort of weather that we might have. So those are some of my methods. They're not pretty, but they work.
Great. Mina is asking for succulents. Do you suggest shade or sunny area?
It depends on the succulent that you have. I tend to grow I have a lot of shade in areas of my yard. So my succulents are kind of in half sun and half shade. The Dudleyias definitely like a little bit more shade than other plants.
Should clarify lotus succulents.
The what?
LOTUS, she said.
The lotus. No. The lotus. If she's talking about Hosakia gracilis or Lotus formosissima, that is not a succulent per se. If it's not the scientific name, I'm not quite exactly sure what it is. But a lot of plants really don't mind shade, especially as they're becoming established. Just to help them get established over the course of a year or two. But if you're planting in the fall, they've had like several months before the heat waves get started. So that's one way to really help plants through. If plants are really struggling, then it's the wrong plant or the wrong plant community. And so you want to kind of examine, what plants are really struggling, and kind of think about what kind of community that they do thrive in. And, getting out in nature to see what plants grow together is also very useful. And, just try to mimic that as much as possible in your own yard.
Great. We have a question for Cecilia. Do you have any recommendations for protecting young seedlings from insects? She grew some black sage seedlings from seed, but over half have been eaten by earwigs.
Oh, that's a shame. So you still have half left, which is good. And, not knowing how many that you have to protect seedlings. You know, some people use diatomaceous earth around plants. You know, I've had earwigs or larvae of some kind eating things that I even grow in pots. I had a trillium that was in a pot, and I noticed that the leaves were slowly disappearing, but I didn't feel like digging it up and like finding the fat grub that was feeding upon my my beautiful plant. But I did eventually. The plant's still alive. But for seedlings, you know, protecting them, you could probably use diatomaceous earth. Some people use crushed eggshells. You know, if you wanted to try to lure them with something else that you didn't mind feeding them with. Generally, when, you know, people saying, oh, these bugs are just like eating everything down to an oven, that means you have something that's really, really yummy. And that, you know, if you think about, like, if you go to a salad bar, right, and like all of the bacon bits are gone, they clearly need to put more bacon bits out because they're really tasty. Everybody wants them. So I always say, you know, if you see a plant that's really getting eaten, grow more of it, because that way you'll feed everybody, and chances are you'll end up with something left over rather than everything getting mowed down. So these are the kind of the clues, that lessons, the hints that nature is trying to tell us. It's like, we really like this because we're hungry. You know, do you have any more? And so providing more then feeds everybody, and then, you know, those things when they're out feeding are going to be eaten by other things. And so, you know, I'm always thinking about, you know, like providing ways that things can eat other things. And so when I see plants getting eaten, you know, this is what we want because plants are food. But we have to understand what it means when things get eaten or things don't get eaten, you know, and as well as like when plants don't do well and when they do well. Why is that the case? You know, remember, everything is food. It's all a community, a little strange community. But we have to really try to understand what the hints are that nature is trying to tell us.
Great. We have a question about, would you recommend placing rocks in your plant beds, full coverage or sparingly?
You know, I like to go for an artistic look. But again, it's the function, right? So, you know, I have some very decorative rocks that are next to nice looking plants. You know, it's just like, people don't know it, but that rock has a function. It's not just pretty. But I also use cobble around plants that I've just planted, because sometimes you kind of lose track of where things are. And so a little pebble bed right around the base of a plant. When I say pebble, I mean like a cobble of about 2 inches in diameter or so. You know, instead of one big fat rock, just do a nice little mulch of stone around a plant. Makes it easier to see it, as well as, you know, providing that moisture barrier. So, but whatever you think looks the best. One of the things that's really helpful about a little bit of a cobble mulch around plants too is that when you water things, the water doesn't go, you know, it doesn't splash the soil away. It actually goes on the rocks and then trickles down over the rock and soaks in that way. So rocks are actually pretty useful.
And then we have a question from Mina about keeping flies away and worms, specifically worms that eat basil leaves.
Well, you probably have either some kind of larva eating basil leaves, or maybe slugs or snails, because worms eat things underground pretty much. And so if you're having things eat your basil, it might be a slug or a snail. So you can put out a beer trap for a slug. Even a few pellets of Sluggo, even though people don't like to use it. I occasionally use it very sparingly with tender new things if I don't want the slugs, which are not native, to eat my plants. And it's a very specific thing that slugs eat. It's iron sulfate, I think, and they eat that and die. And so so worms are probably not eating the basil leaves. And what was the other part of that question?
She asked about white flies.
Oh, whitefly. Yeah, that's a gnarly one. You know, again, for those sorts of things, if they're on a food plant, you can use like a basil or a tomato or something like that. You can use like an insecticidal soap to wash those off, or spray them off with jets of water. Sometimes, you know, the best thing to do is like try to get other insects to eat them. And so you can plant plants that are going to be attractive to a lot of different kinds of insects that will be coming there, and you'll have predators because every insect is another insect's meal, pretty much. And so your predator insects are going to be things like wasps. Wasps are carnivores. They love other insects to eat, as well as things like birds coming in. So, but if you plant things where there's going to be that are going to be attractive for other insects to come in and kind of balance everything out. And a plant that I like to recommend that's pretty attractive to a lot of insects is the coast buckwheat, Eriogonum latifolium, the coast buckwheat, great plant. It's got a really cute little white pom-pom flower on it, but it attracts a lot of great insects. And so you bring those in, and you know, it's kind of an invitation for the predators to see what else there is to eat. So that's another way to deal with it. And it's a a relatively low growing plant, so you can, you know, if you had them say in a container, you could move them around where you might need them, and you know, hope that it created enough buzz around the plants with the issues that those white flies and other things would become something else's meals.
Great. Thank you so much, Renita. I don't see any other questions or hand raised. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Juanita, for the great class and lecture. As I mentioned, this will be posted on the BASCA website. And feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. Thank you. We hope to see you again at future classes.
Thanks, everybody.